So, the Pythagorean crew threw this big bash, kinda like our shindig yesterday for our 12th anniversary. And guess what? They stumble upon these things called irrational numbers, totally unrelated to real-world observations. How crazy is that? I was just chatting about right-angled triangles, and boom. Stumbled upon this whole new vibe in number theory called irrational numbers. It was a game changer for sure. Back in the day, we were taught about two kinds of numbers, the rational ones and the irrational ones. It's like we gotta wrap our heads around numbers all over again. At first, we learned the basics from our folks, counting on our fingers, easy peasy stuff that didn't need any major shakeup. Then, out of the blue, someone introduced the idea of zero. And guess what? It was the Indians. So, what's the big deal about the Indians' first gift to the world? Zero. Give them a round of applause. Those ancient Indian folks were something else. While we were all about starting from one, they swooped in with the concept of zero as a legit number. This whole zero business ties back to ancient Indian thinking, which later influenced Buddhist teachings on emptiness and such. It's like going from nada to creating something, flipping the script from being to non-being. They were all about this idea of nothingness, saying everything we see is just a mirage of emptiness. Zero is the real deal. It's the foundation. That's the golden nugget of wisdom the Indians dropped on us humans. We're just having fun like it's a game now. Back in the day, it was a real game changer in the evolution of human thinking, a groundbreaking discovery in the grand scheme of thought history. Nowadays, it's all turned into a math game for kids, but back then, it was a major breakthrough in thinking. So, that wraps up our chat about the Pythagorean school of thought, the whole cosmic view of numbers that's basically philosophy in a nutshell. We're all just living our lives in this world, going through the ups and downs of existence. We can't really avoid the whole life and death thing, or the unpredictability of it all. But hey, there's a way out of this cycle of uncertainty, through math. Yep, when we start diving into numbers and shapes, it's like we're tapping into something timeless and everlasting. Triangles or not, that mathematical world is always there. So, the things we can understand and grasp onto are kinda eternal, And as for the world we see around us, well, it's just a whirlwind of constant change and chance. So after getting all philosophical with Pythagoras and the gang, Western philosophers figured out a way to live a life that's kinda connected to something immortal, by cracking those geometric puzzles. Pretty cool stuff, right? We all remember this story. Picture this, Archimedes is chilling in his hometown when bam, Roman soldiers show up and take over. They storm towards his house, and there's Archimedes, casually working on a geometry problem right in front of his house on the sandy ground. The soldiers are all ready to take him out, but Archimedes is like, hold up, let me finish this math puzzle first. Surprisingly, the soldiers agree, and Archimedes wraps up his geometry problem before anything else happens. When death is looming, why is Archimedes so cool and collected? Well, while he was crunching those numbers, he was already in the zone of the eternal. What more is there to fear? So, what does math and geometry mean to those Pythagorean crew and the later Greek thinkers? It's like our top concern being totally satisfied. We're all gonna kick the bucket eventually, life's a wild ride, existence is just a roll of the dice. But by cracking those immortal geometry puzzles, we shake off the randomness of existence and rise above the whole life and death thing. That's the soul's ultimate bliss right there. Later on, Aristotle was like, the top part of the soul is reason. What's reason all about? It's about the eternal world, because in that eternal world, our soul finds its ultimate bliss. When ancient Greek philosophy rolled in, little did they know it would shake things up big time for humanity, paving the way for the natural sciences we know today and laying down some solid foundations. It's all about where it all started, you feel me? So Pythagoras dropped this knowledge bomb, right? He was like, yo, check it, people are like the Olympics, athletes, vendors, and spectators. And guess what? The spectators got it made. Athletes are all about scoring that championship title, vendors are hustling for that profit during the games. But spectators? They just chill and watch the show. They ain't in it for the money or the fame, that's for the athletes and vendors. Pythagoras was like, yo, just watching and vibing, that's the sweet life right there. The philosopher should live like a spectator, because spectators have it best. They don't chase after fame or money, they just chill and watch things unfold. In that calm observation, they find the most joy for their souls. That's the philosopher's life right there. So Pythagoras thought that those of us in our crew are like the chill spectators, the third kind of folks. That's how we've nailed down the key idea of ancient Greek thinking, Pythagoras' view of numbers in the cosmos, drawing a line between two things. What line? The one separating things you can touch and things you can understand. The stuff you can touch is temporary and fades away, while the stuff you can understand is timeless. So these Western science geeks, especially the theory buffs like physics nerds, get their kicks from diving deep into the theoretical roots of the universe. In that deep thinking, they find the ultimate joy in life, something us regular folks might not quite get. And guess what? This whole mindset links up with Jewish teachings and boom, you got Christianity. If you ask European Christians, so, after following the Bible teachings all your life, what are you really aiming for? They'll probably say, I'm aiming for my soul to head to heaven when I kick the bucket. Then the Chinese folks might poke further and ask, okay, cool, but what's your soul gonna do up there in heaven? And the Christians would respond, to chill with God forever, man. And then, naturally curious, we might say, alright, but what's the deal once you're hanging out with God? No biggie, just to think deeply and reflect with God. So, your soul is on a one-way trip for that, which seems a bit lonesome, don't you think? If heaven's got a fancy spread waiting for you, then that's worth it. But if it's just for contemplation, well, that's like being cold and lonely up in the high places. We keep questioning those European Christians, so, the end goal is for your soul to head to heaven and just chill with God forever, knowing everything, right? What's the thrill in that? They'll claim it's the ultimate happiness for the soul. But wait, do we really see it that way? The Christians, especially the genuine ones, will explain that when we finally get to heaven to chill and reflect with God, our soul breaks free from all the worldly desires and finds eternal peace. That's their take on it. In our earlier chat, we delved into the Pythagorean school's take on numbers in the universe. It's been going pretty smoothly, this important step of clearly separating two types of things, the stuff you can perceive and the stuff you can know. The stuff you can perceive is temporary, while the stuff you can know is everlasting. So, the Pythagorean school is leaning towards dividing the world into these two categories. We gotta talk about this dude named Heraclitus, a big deal in ancient Greek philosophy. You might have heard of him. He's the guy who said that famous line, you can't step into the same river twice. Think about it, like when we talk about the Yellow River, right? The water never stays the same. What Heraclitus was getting at is that everything in the world is always changing. It's like a continuous flow. So, each thing can be thought of as both existing and not existing at the same time. Take me, Wang Defeng, for example. My body is like a roller coaster of life and death, we all know that. Our bodies are like a revolving door for cells, some kick the bucket, some come to life. So, we're constantly changing. Think about it. Was there a big gap between little Wang Defeng's look and how I look now? Oh yeah, huge difference. Fast forward a few decades, I'll be all old and wrinkly, with a head full of white hair, a far cry from today. But everyone's on the same page that it's still me. If anyone tried to argue otherwise, it would be a pretty big deal. Think about this. In ancient times, there was a man who went out to fight. If he fought for a long time and got injured, and then returned to his hometown 10 years later, but his wife refused to accept him, what can he do? For example, the neighbor planted a tree, and later this tree grew, bearing fruit. Then the neighbor picked all the fruit from the tree, leading to a legal dispute. So, the two of them went to the judge. The neighbor who planted the tree pointed to the neighbor who picked the fruit and accused him of stealing, say, pears. The other neighbor disagreed, saying, "Is that tree yours?" He said, "Of course." The neighbor then asked, "What was the tree like when you originally planted it?" "A sapling, right? Small and short." "Let me ask you again, is the tree today the same as the one before?" "It's thick and robust, towering sky high. Is there a big difference from before?" It must be admitted that there is a significant difference. Is it the same tree as before? No, so I didn't pick the fruit from your tree. How can this lawsuit be settled? So, Heraclitus had this question, you know? Like, everything is always changing, so technically each thing is there and not there at the same time. But we still call things what they are, like the Yellow River is still the Yellow River, right? So, how do we even make sense of the universe? Later on, Western thinking kind of decided that the universe is all about the basic building blocks that don't change, and all the changes we see are just like side effects of that. So, the idea is that the real truth of the universe is this basic stuff, and all the changes we see are just like what happens on the surface. For instance, when water turns into ice, they may look different, one's liquid, the other's solid. We get that change happens, but we still consider them both as H2O, just one in liquid form, water, and the other in solid form, ice. So, we kind of overlook this changing part and focus on what doesn't change. This whole discussion started with Heraclitus and Parmenides clashing. Should we stick to the unchanging thing or embrace the changes? When you ask Chinese folks about how they see the world, they'll tell you it's all about change. The first big philosophical text in China is the Book of Changes, I Ching. Some folks might think it's all about predicting the future, but actually, the interpretations of the hexagrams and their texts show how the ancient Chinese folks understood the world. That's why both Confucianism and Taoism trace their roots back to the I Ching. So yeah, the idea is that these two philosophies come from the same place, the good old I Ching. I Ching is basically the Chinese folks' take on how they saw the world back in the day. Check out the title, What's That All About? It means change, showing that change is what really makes the universe tick for them. But what did Westerners figure out later on? They were all about substance being the key to the universe. So, that's where the gap starts to show. And here's the kicker, to get to substance, you gotta start with change. That's where this dude Heraclitus comes in. He famously said you can't step into the same river twice, because everything's a mix of existing and not, putting the spotlight on change. Heraclitus thought the universe was all about fire. Thales was all about water, Anaximander was into the infinite undifferentiated stuff, and his student Anaximenes was talking about air. And now, Heraclitus is throwing fire into the mix. But hold up, Heraclitus isn't trying to pinpoint one single starting point, he's actually breaking it down. See, the origin implies there's some substance to it, and he's getting to the core of the world being unified in its essence. But he goes ahead and labels this essence as fire, which is basically breaking down what substance really means. Why fire? Because it symbolizes constant change and resilience. So Heraclitus thought the world was like a fire that never goes out, burning and fading within certain limits. That's the world for him. Why should you care about this? Well, there's this important concept called measure. Fire embodies the guidelines that eternal change follows. Even though everything is always changing, there's one thing that stays the same: the proportionality that controls these changes, which is pretty similar to what the Chinese philosopher Lao Tzu believed.